Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started on this next panel. Welcome. I'm pleased to be here. My name is Dax Hansen. I'm a partner with Perkins Coie, which is a global law firm. I'm a technology lawyer by training and chair the firm's electronic financial services practice generally, and also the firm's decentralized virtual currencies blockchain practice, which we've been working in this field since 2011 and had an industry practice group since 2013, so we've seen quite a bit. We have a great panel here today, assembled some real veterans in the industry that I think you'll find very interesting, where we're going to be talking about the applications of blockchain technology to financial services in the financial services sector. What I'd like to first do is just introduce our panelists generally, and then we'll get into some discussion of the initiatives that are currently out there, and then talk about a couple particular issues that we've, as a panel, identified as potentially interesting to you and relevant to future developments in the financial services space. And then we'll try to leave a few minutes for questions at the end of the block. So, Tim, why don't we go ahead and start with you? Just give us a brief introduction of yourself and really what organization you're with and the focus from which you're approaching these topics.
Sure. Hi, my name is Tim Swanson. I'm Director of Research at R3, which has built a bank consortium of 30 institutions. And we are looking at using some of this tech and utilizing it in capital markets, specifically back office. So I guess specific use cases maybe we could talk about throughout the panel.
Great, thanks.
Angus de Crespigny from Ernst & Young, New York. I look after a lot of our global, what we call distributed infrastructure initiatives. We obviously look at a lot of the sorts of things that Tim looks at, but we also assist banks and other financial institutions with identifying new ways in which this can help secure credit or enter new markets which weren't possible previously.
Hello. Okay. My name is Daniel Hassan. I'm a software engineer with Robinhood Co-op. Hands up if you've heard of Robinhood Co-op. It's about, okay, so 10th of the room. So Robinhood Co-op is a cooperative hedge fund set up in 2012. We'll go more into that later. And we use blockchain for a lot of asset peer-to-peer trading within our membership. That's enough for now.
Ayako.
Hello, my name is Ayako Miyaguchi. I'm managing director of Japan for Kraken, virtual currency exchange, global virtual currency exchange. I've been watching industry activities in Japan, and especially lately talking with financial institutions and banks about blockchain technology and also potential future products for them, which I can talk more later.
Great, thank you.
I'm Kathleen Moriarty, and I am a partner at a law firm in New York called Kaye, Scholer. I specialize in financial products, securities, and blockchain, Bitcoin as it relates to those things.
Great, super, thanks. So as you can see, we have a wide variety of expertise here on the panel, from lawyers to technologists and consultants, policy folks and consultants. So we'll get, I think, a dialogue going here. But I thought it'd be useful just to put out on the table the initiatives that are underway right now. There's been a lot of talk about the promise of blockchain technologies, that it can solve all the world's problems. Some of that's true, but I thought it would be useful to focus on the initiatives that exist today that are underway right now that will give you a sense for how people have anticipated the first use cases of blockchain technology. So I'd like to split this up into a couple of different categories, but first start with Tim and have Tim give us a few examples of the most notable initiatives that are underway with blockchain technologies as they relate to functions that financial services firms are typically engaged in, I guess traditionally engaged in, so back office solutions, and also just how they may be using blockchain technologies for their offerings of financial services or trading or some sort of facilitation of them, but talk primarily about initiatives where financial services firms are using this tech for their traditional activities.
Sure. So there's a large bank called UBS. They have a project called Settlement Coin that came out, that was announced about 3 months ago, I believe in September, October range, and they're looking at trying to use this tech to actually create on-chain DVP. Basically, this token or whatever it actually is on their chain internally. By the way, it's a pilot project. I'm not saying this in production. And the idea is this actually represents the golden record that creates settlement on-chain. And then there is Overstock just announced, I guess about a week ago, that if you're not familiar, Overstock's an American company based in Utah, and they have been very vocal about supporting what would be basically permissionless networks. In this case, they're using a color coin mechanism on the Bitcoin blockchain to actually issue equity or its own shares, and they received SEC approval to do so. And I believe that there's, if you have time, there's a blog called, I think it's Let's Talk Payments. And about a month ago, they had a pretty good timeline for the last 2 years of major institutions that went through. Another one would be NASDAQ's project with Chain. They announced it back in May. Basically, it's private cap tables on a blockchain. In the original instance, it was Bitcoin, but and then very end of October, I reached out to Adam, who's the CEO, and they announced that they actually made their own chain. It's called Link now, L-I-N-Q. That was announced, I think, October 30th. So there's a wide variety of different chains that people are experimenting on, different use cases. And again, feel free to reach out to me afterwards, and I could go into some more detail.
Tim, before you put your mic down, so maybe hit on Ripple as well. And then for each of those initiatives that you identified, highlight which sort of ledger technology those initiatives are exploring, if you know.
So that's what I get paid to do, is to try and find that out. So yeah, there's another company called Ripple. I know CBA's mentioned in the past that they've been working with it. Ripple's a company in San Francisco. It's about 130 full-time employees. They closed about $32 million in funding this year, and they've been working on international payments, cross-border payments, specifically looking at, I don't want to say disrupting what Swift does, but that typically comes up in the same circle. I don't want to do BD for Ripple, so you go talk to those guys if you want to find out exactly what their pitch is. But the other part of your question was...
So Ripple has its own ledger, then, called the Ripple protocol. I'm trying to get at underlying technology here, sure. Right? That is being used and I think explored by some financial institutions. You mentioned also UBS, Overstock, and NASDAQ. Can you tell which technologies those initiatives are pursuing?
Sure. So, by the way, I've mapped out most of the landscape. There's about 27 different companies that are basically building their own infrastructure. They're raising about $200 million to create effectively their own types of networks, of bank chains, effectively. Whether or not they close that amount of money or they actually produce the deliverable for that's completely different. But the ones I just mentioned, for example, Ripple has its own I don't want to say proprietary network, but they do have a proprietary unit called XRP. In order to use the network, you need that for the most part, although we could talk about IOUs and stuff like that. They have a specific type of consensus method, and again, we could go into the technical weeds during the Q&A if you'd like. The most, I guess, companion to that would be Stellar. They have something, at least originally had something similar to them. NASDAQ originally was using the Bitcoin blockchain, as Overstock does, and again, they've both taken different paths on that. And who else did I mention? UBS. They're using a fork of Ethereum, I believe. If you're not familiar with Ethereum, it was launched about 4 months ago in August or so, and the creator of it's actually here today. I don't see Vitalik sitting around he's in the other room.
In Overstock?
Overstock, as of today, they're using a platform called T0, and T0 is a color coin implementation on the Bitcoin blockchain. And they've spent, if you're looking for market or how much people are spending, they announced about a month ago that they spent $8 million directly building that platform, but about $16 million, about double of the amount based on shared resources, including internal lawyers and BD guys.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tim. Angus, can you talk a little bit about initiatives where perhaps financial services firms are looking at new products or offerings or new ways of using the blockchain technology to expand their reach beyond traditional scope?
Sure, and we have few teams looking at this range of areas. There's obviously a huge amount of benefit to be found if it can be done efficiently in financial services, in traditional financial services, with a lot of the infrastructure that's currently there. One of the things that that we like to how we also look at this is comment from Paul Brody is that with new technologies really thrive with new workloads, and what that means is that the real exponential gain you can get from new technologies is when you apply it to new problems or create new solutions using that, rather than applying it to current problems or current technology and just migrating that technology. Now you can get a huge amount of benefit from that. The internet has overhauled a lot of traditional products, and a lot of places have made a lot of money or saved a lot of money from doing that. There have also been a lot of companies like, say, Facebook or Snapchat, or that Snapchat would have questionable value at this point, but it's valued very highly, right? And you couldn't do that without the internet. And a lot of people get a lot of value out of it. So the things that we're looking at are where this technology can really create new organic markets which do not require any central authority. If you look at, and financial institutions, why this is interesting, if you look at Uber or Airbnb, they are looking to own transport or looking to own the hotel industry. But what they're really doing is increasing the utilization of assets. And if you're increasing the utilization of assets, you can then go to the next stage, which is provide funding to allow people to do that. And Uber's gone route and provided financing for that. If you flip that around and you're a financial institution looking at this, and you can provide secured funding against someone who's someone's asset who they have a job, or they're using the asset that they are buying with the financing that you've provided, and consequently their repayments are going to be higher, then that starts becoming quite a good product. How this is relevant with blockchain technology and the internet and Bitcoin or various other protocols is through various facilities that are coming up with the Internet of Things, and you create new markets through the Internet of Things, securing assets, using plugins to that technology. There's some company, the name escapes my mind for the minute, but has blockchain-enabled locks for your door, for example. You hook that up, you can create a decentralized Airbnb, essentially. You can secure that asset. If people stop paying, you lock the door, or create some sort of more advanced way of essentially limiting that asset, but you can increase the utilization, increase the value that people are getting out of their lower utilized assets, and improve the financing and provide cheaper credit. So that's some of the stuff that we're looking at.
Fantastic. Thanks, Angus. Daniel, tell us a little bit about Robinhood Co-op's focus and how you're using blockchain technologies or Bitcoin for financial inclusion, or for financial activism, or for ways of bringing in some of the unbanked, for instance, into this model.
Okay.
Or feel free to go outside of that scope as well. Just tell us a little bit more about
I'll try my
Robinhood Co-op.
best. To try and set some of the context for where we're coming from, I'm going to start by asking you guys some questions. So, how many of you get paid? Hands up if you do. It's good in Australia. That's a higher number than in Europe. How many of you at the end of each month, I'm assuming, no, in Australia it's every 2 weeks. At the end of each 2-week cycle where you get paid, you kind of look at your bank balance and you feel happy. For the camera, that's about 5 from a room where about, I'd say, 80% initially put their hand up. Okay, so broadly, that's part of the context from where Robinhood is operating. That is, finance in its current form doesn't work for most people. And within this room, I'd say it's working about as well as it can be if you look at it globally. As I understand it, if you earn $35,000 a year, globally you're in the top 1%. So when we often hear these calls of the 1% are bad, that puts it a bit into perspective. And even for a lot of the 1%, finance in its current form leads to us having something of a financial allergy. gets to the end of the month or the end of 2 weeks. It's not so good. So when we talk about bringing in a new relationship to finance, or the opportunities that blockchain afford in relation to finance, from Robinhood's perspective, it's to actually get to the root of what is finance, what is value in society. So by most measures, we're not a poor generation or time. By most standards, there's an abundance of value. Where there becomes a scarcity is who gets to make a claim on that value. And typically, the people that we call the 1% are normally the top 1% of the 1%. So what Robinhood is doing with blockchains is to try and find ways where we can re-engineer the flows of value through society. Who gets to make a claim on the value flows? And our proposition and thesis is that actually peer-to-peer markets, giving people the opportunity to create financial instruments themselves, peer-to-peer, much as Angus was just mentioning, opening up new organic markets, that's where we're headed. Peer-to-peer finance is coming. Now, an article came out recently in the Wall Street Journal called The Uberization of Finance. Can I see a hand if you read that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Have you heard of Uber? You can't you can kind of get where that's going. Now, typically with companies like Airbnb, Uber, and other such, what we get is a disintermediation of who the middle person is. You can get these massive taxi companies that don't own a taxi. You have massive accommodation companies such as Airbnb without owning much property at all. On the flip side of that, we've got a massive amount of inequality and homelessness, but excess housing. So somewhere in the middle of there, we've got this situation where things are changing, but some of the underlying issues aren't. So we've got a similar situation we find ourselves in, where with companies such as, I don't want to specify which companies, but it's just repeating the similar structures. We've got serious problems in the world right now to do with inequality, oppression, and other such. We've got an increased amount of data available, amazing technologies. So really the question is, what are we doing? How are we actually changing things? And I think that blockchain affords an opportunity to really reimagine what finance means. Because everyone has to deal with money. Everyone needs it. Everyone requires it in our current system to gain access. So Robinhood, in 2012, we set up a hedge fund. We allowed people to gain access to a data mining algorithm that we run on Wall Street. For the cost of 30 euros, you can join the fund. It's a cooperative, so in a legal sense, it's not a hedge fund per se. But it operates much similar in the sense that it hedges value on Wall Street. But really, that's not the end goal for us. So I'm actually the Chief Network Officer for Robinhood Services, which is the for-profit legal entity that's seeking outside funding to build a platform that re-engineers peer-to-peer finance, person to person, allowing people to create their own financial instruments in hope that we can re-engineer how flows of value circulate through society. And a parting question for you. How many of you have created a financial instrument? One. Cool. Why? Is it that we can't? So my friend Vinay Gupta says that what we're trying to do is put financial power tools in the hands of everyone. And it might mean that we end up blowing off a hand or two. It's not necessarily a good idea, but what have we got to lose? And a parting word on there is a colleague, Yaramil from Dine, says that what we had with Bitcoin was a breaking of the taboo of money. And I think where blockchains are leading to, and what he meant by that was typically money could only be created by central banks or state. And what we see with Bitcoin is that actually by relying on math, cryptography, and an ecosystem of the ecosystem that is Bitcoin, we've got other people involved in value. Now, where Bitcoin blockchain is headed is breaking the taboo of who gets to decide and create how the flow of value circulates through society. Sorry, I hog the time there. But I hope that answers some of the
Fascinating.
question.
Yes, absolutely, very helpful. Something to keep our eye on, for sure. Well, and let me ask one quick question. So how convinced are you as a firm that blockchain technology, Bitcoin, is that rail that will enable this peer-to-peer finance that you've described?
We're in terms of positioning ourselves, I think we're positioning long. So we're quite invested. Given the direction of ubiquitous computing, kind of more and more people interconnected, and the trusted automation that blockchains can afford if we can get there. If it's not the end game, it's certainly a step in the right direction.
Yeah, great, thank you. Ayako, you spend time in Japan, you spend time with regulators. I understand you have some conversations with some of the financial services firms in Japan. Can you give us a description of initiatives that are underway in Japan, either with financial services firms, systems integrators? What is happening in Japan as it relates to blockchain technologies?
So fintech is really big buzzword there now. It's just like any other countries, but the word didn't even exist until early this year. And so in Japan, this industry started with mangoks, unfortunately, because it was there. But now, finally, they're more focused on this technology and blockchain, especially blockchain. And all financial companies are competing with each other, try to learn, and every week there's some sort of event happening, and it's all packed with people from banks and other financial institutions. Some big FX companies are, one of them announced to work with Kraken to offer virtual currency. And most of them used to be like more hesitant to until regulations are set there. And since Japan first originally decided not to regulate the space, it was actually harder to work with financial institutions because they didn't take us seriously. But now actually regulations are happening. I'm also one of founding members of self-regulatory organization, JEDA, and we have been discussing with FSA for upcoming regulations. But that won't be active at least another year or so. And now financial institutions, they can't wait until then because they don't want to lose the competition. So a lot of companies invested into the space or thinking of doing something with blockchain, but still discussion stage. But especially banks are very aggressive to learn, not to just learn, but produce some new product. And in Japan has this system called Zengin system. Zengin network is the national bank system that you have to use to transfer money from any bank to any bank. And currently the operation time is only between 8:30 a.m. to 3:30 a.m. 3:30 p.m., which hasn't been updated since 1973. Wow. So back then it was a good system. It works great, but it's not real-time settlement. It's not really like possible. So Bank of Japan is aware that the system has to be changed. And now they learn something about blockchain, and they hear those stories about, what R3 is doing, and NASDAQ and T0, and so they're very eager to catch up with the world, but also possibly do something specific only for Japan system. And then there is also other Japan-specific payment system, like something like point system, which is very unique there. People use point to buy things at convenience stores so they have unique payment system, and then all of them are not really integrated. So everyone is discussing about this potential use of virtualized tokens or a way to integrate those systems too. So I think the country is pretty small. So once it gets popular, everyone tries to compete each other, and it's really happening like now. That's
Great. Good. Thank you, Ayako. So I'd like to make just two observations and then switch gears from discussion of the initiatives into a couple of specific questions, topics. So first observation is that the Zengin system needs to be updated, right? The second one is in the United States, our systems, our ACH clearance settlement system and similar systems need to be updated. So there's been discussion of real-time payments. Other countries in Europe, for instance, have rolled those out. Other countries have lagged behind. But really, we have had the beginnings of the development of this real-time payment technology just on a grassroots basis from the private sector, really. I mean, from my perspective, this is moving information about financial services transactions over internet protocols. And that is what Bitcoin is, Ripple, Ethereum, all these others are the beginnings of that. And of course, they need to be tested and validated. But we have real-time payments technology now in these technologies, blockchain technologies, which is part of the reason, I think, for the excitement. Second observation is that of the initiatives that were mentioned by our panelists, two of them are using Bitcoin technology. A couple of fork of Ethereum, you said, Ripple, but also Bitcoin. And I would just like to be a little bit controversial for a minute and just say that from my vantage point, there's been a lot of discussion lately about Bitcoin being bad and blockchains being good. And people don't use Bitcoin because it seems to be a bad word. But blockchains are popular. Blockchains are great. And I think personally that that's just a bit short-sighted, that the Bitcoin technology has its uses. It's a non-permissioned ledger system where untrusted nodes, unidentified nodes can run nodes to run the transactions. And there's a use for that. And for certain transactions, you may not want that. You may want to add a software layer on top of it or keep it within a group of permissioned nodes. But I guess I would just challenge people to not look too quickly pass over Bitcoin technology, since it is one of the largest supercomputers. But having made that statement, I'd just like to get quick reactions from the panelists if people have other views on Bitcoin bad, blockchain good. You know, is that right? Where you guys are working in this industry, what are your assessments? And maybe we'll start with you, Kathleen, just real quick. What are your observations?
Well, in New York, to some degree, it's like the Wild West. So I haven't heard too much about Bitcoin being bad and blockchain being good. They're sort of considered the same thing, if you will. And I think what's going on is what was discussed earlier on the panel, which is people are trying to pick the right platform for what particular problem they're trying to solve or what product they're trying to create. And if it happens to be Bitcoin or it happens to be a blockchain, that's great. If it happens to be Ethereum, that's great too. So at least in New York, I haven't heard a whole lot of dichotomy about that.
Okay, good. Others, reactions?
I think the Bitcoin bad, blockchain good came about as people were looking at Bitcoin as a currency solely, and the how I tried to explain it to my mother, who is minimizes a window and calls me up to understand what's going wrong with her computer. I explained that it's, you've built a bunch of rail lines and people started trading train engines over these rail lines because they thought they were really valuable. Then people started thinking, actually, these don't have a whole lot of value. And then they started working out that you can actually add carriages to it, and it's what it actually carries. So that, there is a benefit in having a fully public blockchain that is a central arbiter for stuff, if it is carrying information. And I mean, Tim alluded to this, or what this might be earlier, which is exactly what we see as well, that the internet, you don't have every computer in the world connecting directly into the internet. You've got multiple networks that then that then connected to each other and grew up, and I think that's a very possible end use case. Now, whether the some sort of interconnected public network that people can trust on or people can use as an arbiter of truth that gets stored there, whether that's Bitcoin, whether that's Ethereum, whether it's some centrally backed, some chain developed by some central banks that connect with each other, don't know. But I think as a currency, people got shaky with it, but it seems to be coming back as people realize you can actually do more than just simply use it to exchange value.
Thanks. Other reactions?
Sure. I don't think anyone at R3 thinks, we don't have like a house policy on saying Bitcoin's bad. It's all specific needs. Like if Satoshi or whoever this guy is, maybe it's Craig, this guy in Australia or something, we could talk to him. Poor guy, huh? Or maybe not poor guy. We don't have an R3 position on Craig either. So if Satoshi had wanted to build something for banks, Bitcoin would not look like what Bitcoin looks like today. He would have designed it around different parameters, different security assumptions. There's trusted parties involved with banks. And Bitcoin was designed to be with the assumption that there's untrusted parties. So they solve two different sets of needs. And so I don't think that I would say, Bitcoin's good or blockchain's, or vice versa, whatever we're saying here. And I think most people at R3 would probably agree with that statement too.
Thanks. Did you have a view, Ayako?
Yeah, well, I personally don't, of course, like we offer Bitcoin too, but I think it shouldn't be something that should be compared. But it is true that when we talk about regulations, that Bitcoin is something that, because it acts like a currency, something that needs to be regulated. But in terms of good or bad, well, unfortunately in Japan, like I said, it started with Mangox. It did have a bad image, and now, like if you talk about the same thing using the word big blockchain, and I get a different reaction for sure.
So I guess what we're really saying is that, currency use is the killer app of Bitcoin. It was designed for that, but we've found that it can be used for other things too, and that decentralized ledger concept is useful and needs to be enhanced, modified in certain ways for certain other applications, and so you have other protocols being developed. Okay, good. So I want to switch to another topic, settlement finality. Tim, why don't you, let's spend 3 or 4 minutes talking about that. Can you tee up, what is settlement finality? First of all, what is settlement finality? What does it look like on a decentralized ledger, distributed ledger? And how do you avoid things? Kathleen and I were chatting earlier. How do you address things like fat-fingered error entries on a irreversible ledger system? And go ahead.
It sucks. He actually just took every single word I was going to say. So this is something, again, I know we mentioned that the previous panel, and obviously we have 2 lawyers, which is great because we could talk to them and pick their brains for free education. We don't have to be billed for. So at the end of the day, with all this technology, especially when you're working with financial institutions, all these questions of when does finality actually occur, there's to our knowledge, nobody's actually sat down and come up with the definitive explanation or exegesis. We actually need more lawsuits. We need more precedents of people going to court saying, whether it's virtual currency or whether it's some of these other private chains or whatever, we need to have more legal precedents to come down to actually say, hey, the settlement actually took place on-chain, or maybe if you're using some of these settlement coins or color coins or something like that, there was no settlement finality because the property was never delivered. So I don't have a good answer for you. That's what if you guys do, feel free to come up to me afterwards, because this is something that's very, very important to anyone wanting to actually adopt this technology. Because if banks don't feel comfortable that you don't actually have legal settlement finality, or regulators don't, then this technology won't be used for that. We'll just be a bunch of scientific experiments. I hope that didn't turn your smiles upside down too much on that.
So you flagged the issue there, and I think we do want to get some feedback from the audience, but Kathleen, you have some experience, you have a lot of experience in this industry dealing with securities and commodities and other financial instruments where settlement, clearance, finality, all of these things are absolutely critical to the machine working. What are your views on this topic of settlement finality? And then, frankly, if you can just add a little bit more, to go a little bit broader, just give us a regulatory reality check here. How well, currently are we positioned to be able to use blockchain technology for some of these settlement clearance back office solutions that we hope that they can be used for?
I'll answer the second question first because it frames the first, I think. When you're practicing in the area of Bitcoin blockchain, trustless situations, your first job with the regulator, unlike in most cases where you go in and you say, hi, here's the new product, here's how it works, let's talk about the issues that you have and the issues it may bring up. What you first have to do is educate the regulator about Bitcoin, Ethereum, whichever underlying platform you're talking about. There's a whole nother range of discussion, and sometimes they're fairly up to speed, sometimes they're not at all up to speed. It depends on the agency, it depends on the people in the agency, but it's something that you do have to do that you don't have to do under normal circumstances. So that adds a layer of complexity to the product, if you will. Then, although it wasn't good blockchain, bad Bitcoin, definitely there was a huge issue about Bitcoin in terms of Mt. Gox and Silk Road and any number of things. And so, the first reaction would be, well, this is just an illegal Ponzi scheme, and so you'd have to dismantle the incorrect assumption of the regulator and then do the education before you could actually talk about the product. That is diminishing a little bit as as the regulators see more and more different kinds of people coming in with different kinds of products that are all based on these platforms. So I think they don't automatically assume it's now an illegal, thing. I think it's fair to say that the regulators are cautious because this is the monetary system. This is the securities system, it's the banking system. They don't want to do something inadvertent that will blow the whole thing up. Not that it can't be blown up from other perfectly normal circumstances, but they don't want it to blow up from this particular circumstance. So they are apt to be cautious, but my experience has been largely that the regulators are interested in hearing about what the solutions might be. And so they're going to take it with a grain of salt, they're going to do their own research, they're going to question you, but they're, at least in the States, they're not going to just walk you out the door. They're going to listen and ask questions. Now, one of the kind of questions they would ask, for instance, would come up in the settlement context. If you were to present them with a platform and say, here's how we'd like to settle securities in the future instead of the present way, one thing they would notice, at least if you're talking about the blockchain and Bitcoin, is that once you make a transaction, it's irreversible. So one of the questions they're going to ask is, traders make a lot of errors all the time. They're moving quickly, they speed over need, and they make errors. And now, in the current system, you can reverse those errors before anything actually happens with the settlement. If you are, under current circumstances, as I understand it, if you were to structure a settlement system using Bitcoin blockchain, once that transfer moved, that's it. That's the end of it. Now, either there's going to have to be some other mechanism built in or built on top or built alongside that will address these problems, or you're not going to be able to use the Bitcoin blockchain protocol because the needs of being able to reverse a transaction are not going to go away. So it either is, the system is not meant for it, or there has to be some additional, workout that will make it work for it. That's my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, and just a slight clarification there. We talked about Bitcoin blockchain. We heard in the keynote also that's on the Ethereum platform too.
Right.
That a lot of these platforms are just built that way, right? So it's not something that's necessarily unique to Bitcoin blockchain, but something relevant to this technology with crypto tokens.
The other thing they will raise, I think, because remember, they're looking out for investor protection, but they're also looking out for systemic risk and safety and security of markets and safety and security of the money system. If you have 12 different groups, each creating their own individual system where they can settle, now you're going to have a fractured settlement system because you're going to have, Group A settling these particular securities, Group B settling these particular securities, or you're going to have Group A settling these securities and Group B settling them, but in a different way. So what happens when Group A and Group B have to settle between each other? And they're going to start saying, isn't this more inefficient than less efficient, than efficient? And they're going to want to know how those things segue up together. So those are the kind of questions that somebody who's working on it from the inside, they don't necessarily have to address because they're just trying to solve a particular solution. But a regulator has to stand back and say, well, it looks like this is causing these issues. So that's another area where they'll be interested in the answers to those things.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Kathleen. So significant areas of analysis still required. I want to leave the last close to 4 minutes for questions. I have lots more questions for the panelists. I'm sure you do too, but I want to get to some questions here in the audience if you have them. Raise your hand if you have a question or a comment or some input for this panel discussion. Okay, over here, please.
Hi, my name is Chris. I'm from Holding Redlick Lawyers. A question for Kathleen and yourself, please. What's the effect of blockchain technology on due diligence, and what impact do you think it'll have moving forward?
Well, that's a good question, and it's a very broad question. I think that from my own experience, because I've been in the situation of trying to register the first exchange-traded fund that will hold Bitcoins, the registration statement contains a huge disclosure about how Bitcoin and blockchain work. And it's daunting to try to explain it clearly enough for the average investor and yet deeply enough that it makes sense. So it's hard, I think, is my answer.
Ditto. Next question.
This is a question for Tim and Angus. In Australia, the banks are heavily investing in building out the new payments platform for real-time payments. With the advent of blockchain, Bitcoin, is that a wise decision to continue investing in that project, or should we see it through and then make future plans after that project is completed?
I don't know enough about the. I mean, I know of the initiative. I don't know enough about the structure. In reality, what they should be doing as part of that project is having a look at a distributed ledger technology as just a possible form of infrastructure for it, right? And there will be benefits of it. There will be downsides of it. And that should be part of the assessment. It's not a fix everything, and depending on the scope of what they're trying to do, it could be great. It may not be. I think what R3 is doing internationally probably in itself would lead to different considerations on infrastructure. Tim.
Yeah, sure. So I know I can't speak to what's happening in Australia, but the Federal Reserve, for example, has a similar working group, and I think they've assembled a number of different vendors, startups. I think Ripple actually joined the working group on faster payments. So I don't see any. It shouldn't be an either or, in my opinion. Again, I'm not a regulator or policymaker. You could have a bake-off with many different vendors and have benchmarks to see which one gives the best speeds or something like that. So I don't think it's too late in the game to at least my understanding with the approach is it's too late in the game to look at multiple different ones. But again, I'm not an expert with what's happening here in Australia.
Great, thanks. I think we have time for one more question. Let's see. I guess we'll take two. We'll take one there and then one here in front. Go ahead, gentlemen.
Cliff Richards from the ASX. Notwithstanding the learning curve that central banks and regulators need to go on, when they're at a base level of understanding of the technology, how long, or what might be required, and how long would it take, do you think, before we see a central bank issue currency on the rails?
A long time. I mean, it's when you start, and I know that we have one. I think Sarah was speaking. Was she speaking? Is she speaking? I think there's next up. Okay, I think that might be. She might be discussing that next up. So she could next door right now. Okay, hello, Sarah. There's a lot when you start looking at the economic impact, what you want such a product to be able to do, let alone all of the typically how long it will just often take with the size of the personnel infrastructure in governments to get moving with it. Also would depend on what they're looking to attack. If it's just looking to say an NPP type thing, that's a lot faster to get out. If you're looking to replace our current currency, I think that's a big bet.
I'll agree that we're still early days, but I also note that Bitcoin and blockchain technology move faster than dog years, so we may be surprised. It's an accelerated pace.
I'll add one other thing. This isn't quite on topic, but it's kind of side by side. That is, it's not a central bank, but I'm working with someone who is working with the British government, and there are other governments interested as well, but this will be a pilot program. And the program will be to create, using Bitcoin and blockchain, will be to create a new token system for welfare that will be programmed so that it can be used for all the things you want welfare to be used, but it will not be capable of being used to buy, booze or go gambling or what have you. If that is a success, it will save them an enormous amount of money, which they'll either use for more welfare benefits or they'll give it back in the form of tax rebates to people. And there are a number of other governments that are watching this very carefully because they think if it works, it'll be a huge help to them as well. So although that isn't the central bank adopting it as a currency, it would be adopting it as a use case.
Thanks. We're out of time already. So, Tim, I know you want to talk. Maybe we can let people chat with you later. Here, the front. Did you still want to ask a question? Let's get the mic real quick so other folks can hear.
Hey, my name's Preeti. I'm from CBA. Angus, and also just the last question, answer around welfare. I've been hearing a lot of things around the utopian vision for blockchain to really address the existing inequality in society. CBA's David Whiting earlier touched on the potential of blockchain to transform businesses and communities. Now, I might be naive in asking this question, but we can certainly see the functional values within the banking sector around settlements, transparency in supply chain processes, etc. So my question is this: what are some of the ways that you think profit-driven organisations that depend on driving ultimately shareholder value use this technology to transform communities, and what questions should we be asking ourselves as bankers when looking at new business models? It's not a quick question.
No, it isn't, and possibly we can pick up more after. But I think you can. One of the areas that we're looking at is, as I mentioned before, new markets, and if you can into these new markets where people don't have that credit, but you can secure assets more effectively. You can, there are two sides with that, right? Providing greater access to finance for people, and you get a higher customer base. Doing that, if you're having such an organic market, you need to change your business model somewhat. But it's having a look at a lot of things. It's what's the size of the, from a business perspective, what's the size of the profit pool? But that also very much goes into, that directly drives from how many customers you have. Look, the more people that get financially plugged into the financial system, bigger customer base you got. And as part of that, the helping out these communities in some of these ways, is take away the purely capitalist side of it is actually a pretty good thing. So I mean, we've got things that we there are a few sort of areas that you can assess it with.
All right. Well, thank you, Angus. We'll let you have the last word there. Thank you all. This has been a great discussion. Big hand for our panelists. Thank you.